Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are advised that this film contains images of people who have passed.
Jim was a Wadjarrie man from Mullewa. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders were not included in the Australian census, nor allowed to vote, until the 1960s. Yet Jim and thousands of other Aboriginal men and women volunteered to serve in the Australian Armed Forces during the two World Wars.
At Wangaratta Camp Victoria, we meet the only all-Aboriginal squad in the AIF, Original Aboriginal Anzacs. They're not in the army as a curiosity, they are volunteers in the service of the country they love, with fixed bayonets instead of the spears their forefathers carried, with bullets instead of boomerangs. The dark-hued diggers go into action. Boots, socks, mere ornaments to a race that's gone barefooted for 1,000,000 years. Regimental march, gum leaf style.
Contrast this portrayal of the Aboriginal man who enlisted in the Australian Army with the reality of Private Jim Joseph, a decorated World War II veteran whose medals are on display in the Museum of Geraldton.
All right, my grandfather enlisted in Mullewa, where he was working at the time as a farmhand. He was bagging coal for a local farmer. The army went in town and him and a few of his mates decided to go in and enlist. Turned out that his mates didn't get accepted, he did, and that's how he ended up in the army.
It is often assumed that the colour of your skin was irrelevant in war, that all that mattered was whether you could shoot straight.
Just when you put someone on a boat, send them across the water to another country, the attitude's not going to change. The jobs my grandfather was given in the army around the camp and so forth were the cleaning jobs, like the toilets, showers, like personal assistant to sergeants, to higher ranking officers.
The opportunity to serve in Australia's armed forces was, for some Aboriginal people, their first experience of equal treatment.
However, when the soldiers returned to Australia and were demobilised, non-Aboriginal soldiers received compensation from a grateful nation, including land grants and spousal pensions. But most Aboriginal soldiers received nothing. They were simply sent back to the fringes of towns or missions from where they came. And they faced the same discrimination as before. For example, until 1954, the Perth CBD and a large area extending to the seaside beaches were declared a prohibited area for Aboriginal people. Aboriginal people could not be found in this area after 6 p.m, and if they worked in the city, they had to be outside of the prohibited area by this time, or be arrested.
Any equality was stripped upon the return home. Aboriginal people were still subject to discrimination. They couldn't go into a bar to have beer with their mates. Aboriginal people could die for their country, but it would be more than 20 years after the war before they could even vote. Dot Peters.
And it would be at least 40 years before many of these Aboriginal soldiers would receive benefits and even wages owed to them. Despite this, many still volunteered to join the army in later years.
I was 17 doing agricultural college at Tarden, Palatine Mission, east of Mullewa, and when the year was just about ending, myself and one of my cousins decided what we should do, and we just said, oh, let's join the army and see the rest of Australia. There's 8 indigenous soldiers in our battalion. It is really good because we had all the same clothes, the same uniform and everything, and we all sat in the same mess hall, what we call the mess, is canteen or where you eat. And yeah, You know, it was nice. The only trouble I had earlier was at recruit training when someone called me a nigger, but he was about 3 times the size of me, so I just walked away from him. About 4 uncles went to the Second World War. They said that, you know, a lot of them couldn't get promotion, or other soldiers and servicemen got a package deal from the government. The indigenous people got nothing. They had to work on their own and find things on their own and, you know, go back to the reserves and all that.
The Bundiara Memorial in Geraldton commemorates the service of the 280 Yamaji men who served in the Australian Army from the Boer War to Vietnam. Almost all were volunteers. Nationwide, over 5,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders served in Australia's wars since Federation. Every year we honour our servicemen and women and say, lest we forget. But the stories of Aboriginal men and women who served in the wars have been largely forgotten, as evidenced by the fact that it was not until 2019, and only then through the personal efforts of Ron Cross, Graham Taylor and others, that this memorial to Jim Joseph and his Yamaji comrades was created.